issues we weren't ready to face. Everything was happening so fast. It hadn't been a month yet since we began with the Ouija board. Our ideas of what was possible were being turned topsy-turvy. We decided to hold one other session to see what Seth had to say about the affair, and again we considered dropping the experiments, book or no book. Yet we could hardly blame Seth, since the seance was our idea to begin with. I had to write up the seance results for one of my early chapters, and I hardly knew how to go about it. The next night, we held what we thought might be our last session. After it, we knew that we were committed, and to us the session really marks the beginning of the Seth material, the end of the preliminary data. For the first time, Seth really, quote-unquote, came through as a definite other personality, laughing and joking. Rob just couldn't believe that he was speaking to me in any ordinary terms. But more than this, Seth's long monologue on the nature of reality captivated and intrigued us. We had no idea that it was actually a highly simplified explanation, cleverly geared to our own level of understanding at the time. It made a tremendous impression on us nonetheless. For nearly 3 hours I spoke for Seth, striding up and down the room, joking, pausing now and then for Rob to catch up with his notes, and delivering this monologue, using gestures and facial expressions, verbal expressions and inflections entirely different from my own. I spoke steadily, without hesitation, breaking up serious philosophical material with jovial comments, much like a professor at a small seminar. The session so aroused our intellectual and intuitive curiosity that all thoughts of discontinuing went out the window. Consider a network of wires, a maze of interlocking wires endlessly constructed so that looking through them there would seem to be no beginning or end. Your plane could be likened to a small position between 4 very spindly wires, and my plane could be likened to the small position in the neighboring wires on the other side. Not only are we on different sides of the same wires, but we are at the same time above or below according to your viewpoint. And if you consider the wires as forming cubes, this is for you, Joseph, with your love of images, then the cubes could also fit one within the other without disturbing the inhabitants of either cube 1 iota. And these cubes are themselves within cubes, and I am speaking now only of the small particle of space taken up by your plane and mine. Again, think in terms of your plane, bounded by its small spindly set of wires, and of my plane on the other side. These, as I have said, have boundless solidarity and depth, yet to one side the other is transparent. You cannot see through, but the two planes move through each other constantly. I hope you see what I have done here. I have initiated the idea of motion, for true transparency is not the ability to see through, but to move through. This is what I mean by fifth dimension. Now, remove the structure of the wires and cubes. Things behave as if the wires and cubes existed, but these were only constructions necessary even to those on my plane. We construct images consistent with the senses we happen to have. We merely construct imaginary lines to walk upon. So real are the wall constructions of your room that you would freeze in winter without them. Yet there is no room, and there are no walls. So, in a like manner, the wires that we constructed are real, though there are no wires. The walls of your room are transparent to me, though I am not sure I would perform, dear Joseph and Rupert, for a party demonstration. Nevertheless, those walls are transparent. So are the wires, but for practical purposes, we must behave as if both were there. Again, if you will consider our maze of wires, I will ask you to imagine them filling up everything that is, with your plane and mine, like two small birds' nests in the nest-like fabric of some gigantic tree. Consider that these wires are mobile, constantly trembling, and also alive, in that they not only carry the stuff of the universe, but are themselves projections of it. And you will see how difficult this is to explain. Nor can I blame you for growing tired, when after asking you to imagine this strange structure, I then insist that you tear it apart, for it is no more to be actually seen or touched than is the buzzing of 1,000,000 invisible bees. It was in this session that Seth suggested we hold sessions twice a week, saying that a schedule was far better than spasmodic activity. He went on, "At one time or another, all of us on my plane give such lessons, but psychic bonds between teacher and pupil are necessary, which means that we must wait until personalities on your plane have progressed sufficiently for lessons to begin. Lessons then are conducted with those psychically bound to us. What you call emotion or feeling is the connective between us, and it is the connective that most clearly represents the life force on any plane, under any circumstances. From it is woven all material of your world and mine." When the material given above was finished, Seth stayed around, as if to emphasize an informal social period. He invited questions, gestured frequently, paused in front of Rob, looking right at him through my open but un-Jane-like eyes. "There is nothing wrong, and perhaps much to be gained," he said, "in trying whatever experiments you want on your own. Call it homework if you like. Perhaps I'll even give you a gold star, although if I know you, you will probably insist that the teacher give the proverbial apple to the pupils instead of the other way around." Then, with strong humorous accents, he spoke about the Ouija board, which we still used to open and close sessions. "It is a matter of formality, in that it renews contact in a familiar manner, and also I have always been partial to formality to some extent. The board gives us a breathing spell, and is a method of saying good day or good evening, or tipping one's hat. I'm also of the opinion that small ritual tends to emphasize data in the mind, and set it off to advantage, in the same way that good cuisine is set off by fine dishes. At the end of a session, it would be most cordial to touch your hands briefly to the board. You're lucky that I don't request you to wear full dress clothing." Rob laughed at this, and so did I when he read me the notes. We were fascinated by the monologue on the fifth dimension, which ran much longer incidentally than the excerpts given here. Seth's personality impressed Rob to such an extent that he, at least, was convinced that Seth was a completely independent personality. He knows me so well, of course, in almost every mood, that he's in an excellent position to judge the differences and similarities between my personality and Seth's. After having Rob describe the session, and after reading the notes, my attitude was one of simple astonishment. Rob and I are very informal. Our friends are informal. The men don't wear hats and suits, for example, but jeans and shirts or sweaters. I found Seth delightful, whoever or whatever he was. Who else did we know so quote-unquote old school who'd even speak of tipping one's hat, or refer to food as quote-unquote good cuisine? Anyway, he certainly didn't sound frightening, and the fifth-dimensional monologue was really provocative. I was already beginning to study my own psychological behavior, though, and the question of Seth's independent reality came more and more into my mind. Since I quote-unquote become Seth in some fashion, I'm never able to see myself as Seth in the way that Rob can, or that my students can in a class session. But I do know that he makes a definite impression on others. Who or what was he? I questioned Rob constantly. How did I look? How did he know someone else was speaking? What was there about Seth that so convinced him that Seth was more than a dissociated part of my own subconscious. Far from looking for Seth in every corner, I guarded my mental integrity with all the determination of my nature. Then I felt silly, because Seth made absolutely no attempt to quote-unquote invade my normal waking day. Worse, I felt that he was amused but understanding, and felt that my efforts, if basically unnecessary, were still important for my peace of mind. Still, I was never aware of new developments until they actually occurred spontaneously, and to my own surprise. If we thought that Seth quote-unquote came through as himself in the last session, we had a lot to learn in the next one, when Seth's own, more powerful voice suddenly emerged. The first session with Frank Withers had been held on December 2nd, 1963. In the 14th session, January 8th, I was ready to speak for Seth, deep masculine-like tones and all. We had traveled some way in little over a month. Beyond doubt, those 30-odd days were filled with the most intense psychological activity, excitement, and speculation that we had ever encountered. It would be at least 3 years, and after my book appeared, before we even began to understand what had happened.